Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Through Their Eyes. I do a lot of things, but this show is my favorite. It is so important that we come together and we listen to the voices of our young adults, our teens, our adolescents, our college kids, high school kids. It's really important. And that's what we're doing here. So we thank you from the bottom of our heart for being here. And so please feel free as the show continues and we introduce our hosts and our guests that you feel comfortable anytime you want. You can call into the studio at 919-518-9773. You can also come in on Skype, and that would be at computers, and that's plural, then the number 2K voice. You will come in on voice, not video. So feel free to do that. And you can also put your name under our video and you'll open up our chat window and you can put information in there, whatever you like. You can put your nickname, we don't care. Ask questions, comment. We will be monitoring it as we go on, and you are always welcome. This is your show. And the more you engage, the better it will be. So with that, and I will be here, I'll be in the back. I'm not a young adult or a teen, but I am motherly and watching. So here I am. So with that, let me introduce Josh, who is our host, and I'm going to say, take it away, Josh.
All right. Hey, everybody. So, my name is Joshua, and I'm currently one of the hosts of the Through Their Eyes podcast. So, I've done this introduction in past episodes, but I'm basically about to be a sophomore coming out of North Carolina in the United States. And for me, doing this entire podcast has really been about deepening the understanding between teens when it can be so hard for people to be willing to talk, and more importantly, also allow us to give role models to teenagers in a time when I think limiting beliefs are a huge thing. There's so many stories out there that can be told to show teens how even they can make a difference as they're growing up. So we have one new co-host on with us today and a guest. So we can start with you, Emily. Please just give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and tell us what made you want to come onto the show.
Alrighty. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. As Josh said, I am a sophomore, well, an upcoming sophomore in college, and I can't agree more with what you said. And I think what had made me want to come onto the show definitely is also just wanting teenagers to have more so of a realistic perspective of, how their peers think. I feel as though in the media we see a lot of just unrealistic expectations for what the usual life that a teenager leads looks like. And I think it's really important for us to see people who not only look like us, but think like us and feel like us and lead similar lifestyles to us represented for them. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually 100% agree with you talking about that familiarity. I think that while media can portray so much, right? Just seeing people actually come and talk and hearing their thoughts gives a whole different perspective. So thank you for that, Emily. And then Summer, feel free, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to come onto the show today.
Hi, I'm Summers, and I was invited here as a guest. I agree with what both of you guys said. I think it's really important for teens to have a voice, and I felt honored that I was chosen as a guest to help speak for teens.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that's enough of an introduction. I want to get straight into the guiding question for today because I'm super excited. So I really wanted to talk about relationships for teenagers and young adults because this is just a topic where I think the cultures are so different in how people view relationships, dating, things of that nature. Even when it comes to relationships with friends, right? Different courtesies, things along those lines. And especially in the teenage years, this is something that has a significant impact on even the mental health of teenagers, right? So I really thought it was super important. So I guess to start off, if one of you guys is free to share, what are your opinions, you think, on how dating should work for a teen? And we can go from there on all sorts of different topics on philosophies and what people think and why.
I think it's a little bit difficult to navigate what a archetypal relationship should look like for a teenager just because being so that a lot of us or a lot of our viewers may live in the US, there are different people with different whose parents have different values. So of course they kind of project or assume those standards onto their children's relationships. Like they have a personal perspective for what their child's relationship should look like versus what their child may think for themselves. So I think it's kind of difficult to just kind of get down to one particular path. But I think it's really important for like kids to be able to be aware of what a healthy relationship may look like in terms of communication, physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, etc. Just because I think being so young, it could be difficult to fall. It can be easy to fall into toxic patterns because you don't have any past experiences to compare your current relationships to, considering that everything that you are doing is a novel experience. So,
Yeah, actually, I think it's awesome that you brought up the whole boundaries point, right? Because I think that where there's a like big divide in what causes, some people to never want to date throughout high school and all versus the people that do, is that people believe there's a value in the experience, right? It's through things like relationships that people end up learning, or, people do it because to them it's a learning experience. And I think that's where the philosophy really differs, because for some people, relationships is so much about learning how you're going to navigate a relationship early on so that you can navigate what you want to be your main relationship. Say if you're looking for a long-term relationship, if you want to navigate it better, people believe you need that experience. But likewise for others, it almost 180s where the more people that you date, like per se, can end up actually getting in the way of your like long-term relationships that you might envision. So I know that definitely goes towards what kind of relationship you're looking for in the long term. But when it comes to things like marriage, right? How does a teen know what they want to do to prepare themselves for it? And that's where family values has a big impact. But I think I'd almost like to hear you guys' thoughts. What do you think? Is it better to get that experience and go through dating people, or just hold off and wait for an older time when your brain's more developed?
Well, I personally think that it's not a bad idea to date at at teenage, like while being a teenager. I would say every failed relationship is a learning experience. Not every relationship has to fail though. Never go into a relationship with like a mindset that, oh, it's gonna fail and I'm gonna learn from it. You always want, because although lots of high school relationships or like teenage relationships, they fail pretty early on, or like they don't last very long, but some of them do. And you never want to ruin a potential relationship by giving up on it before it starts.
So, regarding that summer, what would you say to people that make the counter argument that the more relationships you have, the more you would struggle to commit to one person because maybe you've gotten so used to like constantly having to date different people?
Well, in that case, I don't think you should just focus on trying to date. Obviously, improve on yourself, see what went wrong in your last relationship, try to better yourself first so you don't find yourself constantly trying to date more and more people. I guess if you do date a lot of people, it would be slightly problematic because you'd be just used to the next person, next person, next person. But again, you should never have the expectation that there will be a next person. Always, in my opinion, you should always give your all in your current relationship or whatever you're trying to get.
Can
I
I
think
ask you a question? Oh, Emily, go. I'll save mine. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was going to say, I think being excessive with dating while you're young may be a little bit problematic for teenagers just because you're still at a very like developmental point in your life. And because of that, I feel as though it could cause issues of codependency. I think children, of course, because adolescents are children, they do need some time alone to be able to understand themselves. And of course, like part of understanding yourself is understanding how certain dynamics work with other people and your peers and those who you value and people who are just generally close to you. But at the same time, it is important to understand who you are when you are alone and your innermost thoughts and feelings. So I feel as though excessive dating could not necessarily be the healthiest thing for a developing mind, but of course, like all things in moderation, I'd say.
So I guess I have my first question is, what is the trend in high school or college? Are people, I could never date multiple people at one time. I would forget who I'm with. My husband's lucky I remember him. I'm like, okay, so how is it being done? And you know, how is it being how let's start with that. How is it being done in high school and college? Are people dating multiple people? And then is it a here's my next question. Is it an avoidance of getting close?
Yeah, so I think I'll take that one, Marilyn. Part of the reason why I think that's just such a hard question to ask is because it's almost so different among different groups of people, right? Even at high school, college level, that I mean, it's like asking how do people in high school cook their food, right? Like it's so different among different groups of people. And I do think that the media, especially like in the United States, it does portray a certain dynamic, right? I mean, there's the generic, like, cheerleader, football player, whatever, right? Like, I'm not going to bring it up, but there's that generic kind of dynamic of, oh, the people that date popular people in high school, everybody wants to be dating like a good looking person, things like that. But, depending on the group of people you're with, there's a whole group of people that just don't care for it, don't really care about doing it. I would say it's standard most of the time. Usually people still like to just date one person, right? Like, and dating more than one person among a decent amount of high school kids still, looks like cheating on somebody. It would feel morally wrong, but that's all up to what boundaries you set up with the person you're talking to. So I do definitely believe that at the high school level, like summarized, it's too wide varied for people to figure it out. And that's why the deeper core thing to look at is what causes people to choose those different paths.
From my perspective as a college student, I would agree with Josh in a large like aspect, but something I've also noticed is a very like within like our generation, Gen Z, is almost a non-committal element. There's this thing called situationships that I've noticed that a lot of like college students like partake in, which is essentially when you do relationship things without the label in it. And I feel as though largely this like non-committal like aspect derives from almost option paralysis because with dating apps and everything and having so much access to so many like options per se, it's like it's almost paralyzing because you're like, who do I choose? What do I want? And I think that like leads people to almost refrain from commitment altogether just because they're like, oh, well, there's so much going on. Like, I don't have to pick. Or, it's like, I don't know who to pick because there's so much. What are you guys' thoughts
It's
regarding that?
like everything else. I mean, just like overstimulation, over
Yes.
opportunities to have a relationship. I guess the other thing is when you think about, and then I want to know why something from Sam, but I think Samantha, I'm sorry. Just like there's so many things to choose, right? There's so much technology and so many this is and ways of spending your time. Having the opportunity to be bisexual, heterosexual, pansexual, all the identifications are going in conjunction with the amount of technology and all the choices. It's expanding the choices of who you can date. So I'm curious of do you see it that way, and is it confusing? But I guess I also was curious, Samarth, why are you here today?
Um, as I said before, I was here because I was first of all just invited as a guest speaker. And when I heard the topic, I really wanted to like talk about relationships in general because I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who've gone through like many relationships. I know a lot of different kinds of people who've had different kinds of relationships, whether it be like heterosexual, as you're saying, or like um the main reason I really wanted to speak is because, as I said before, I really think it's important for teenagers to have a voice because it's a lot of times I don't really see perspectives of people who think more like me. I've seen lots of like online, I've seen lots of adults talk, and then I'll be like, oh, this is not how I think at all. But I thought it'd be really helpful for a podcast such as this, where teenagers can share their thoughts.
Yeah, so Sumrit, bringing up the fact that, you have a lot of friends who have gone through relationships before, when the breakup happens, right? Because I think that's also like a point that needs to be addressed. How do you think it affects them? Like, how detrimental is it? Is it worth the potential like happiness or fulfillment prior? How do you think that's had an effect on the people you know?
Well, everybody's different, obviously. Some people go through breakups and nothing changes. It's just like they're normal. They're living their life. A lot of people though will like it hinders their ability to a lot. Like some of my closest friends after going through breakups, they've like stopped eating, stopped like sleeping. And it's like have a lot of negative effects. Eventually, eventually, most of my friends at least have all bounced back and they've all like moved on. But in my opinion, personally, yes, I think that the fulfillment and like the happiness you get by dating someone outweighs the breakup. Like, sure, the breakup is like it sucks, like it's really bad. But I personally would rather have all those memories, the good memories, and be stuck with like the hindrance for just like, until I move on.
Yeah, I think that's definitely really important. And I'm glad you addressed the subset of people, right? When it affects them so much that they struggle to sleep, they struggle to eat. Like I know people who have been in that position as well. As a teenager, it's even more worrying, right? Because how is that going to affect their psyche as they grow up? How is that going to affect how they view relationships? Even though experience is important, what bad experience could potentially affect them going forward? And I think too, it's important to bring up in terms of a work commitment, right? For a lot of teenagers, regardless of what they're doing, sports, academics, etc., they're trying to set up their future in some way. So here it's like, how much does it detract from their future? How much of their time do they have to lose? How much of their time do they have to put away? And I think it's really important to evaluate what is kind of the benefits that could justify that time commitment being lost. So if either of you guys have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it.
I mean, I personally think that before getting into a relationship, you should like decide within yourself how much you really want to commit, because both overcommitting and undercommitting is not good. Like if you commit too much and you start losing time with your family, your friends, then that is also like a really big negative. But undercommitting, neglecting your partner is also really bad. So I think that you should predetermine how much you're willing to give. And obviously, yeah, being in a relationship might hinder your like success if you decide to give more time to your relationship than thinking about your future. But I think it's important, as Emily said before, moderation is extremely important, especially with relationships as a teenager.
I also feel that in terms of time commitment, I feel as though you definitely gauge it as you go along because you develop certain habits while you're young so that way you can utilize them throughout the entirety of your adulthood, because if, like you were saying, like Summer was saying, if you overcommit, then you neglect your hobbies or professional pursuits, et cetera. And if you undercommit, then that person may feel neglected, and you almost neglect the emotional aspect of the relationship and tending to that. So I think it's definitely something that you gauge as you go along with almost anything else that you do throughout adolescence. Everything's just kind of like you wing it because it is your first time mostly for like
Yeah,
a lot of
I also, sometimes, you hear a lot of stories of adolescents, young adults, teens who have been in a relationship who get brokenhearted and things don't turn out well. And I was wondering if you all could talk some about that. And I think we should also talk some about, like, what do you do? Or what do parents do? Or people who love you, your best friends do? Or how do you support each other? And
I think with rough breakups, what the important thing to look into is why it may have been so rough. Was it with two teenagers like in an appropriate, like who are like appropriate, like have an appropriate age difference? Because a lot of things that like children, adolescents, sometimes they get preyed upon by like older people. And grooming is also something that happens a lot to teenagers, where someone much older than them may try to prey upon them, and like use them because they're young and they have a certain naivety about them because they are a child. And so I think in that regard, when it comes to situations like that where the child or adolescent is endangered, I feel as though parents definitely need to step in. And that's one of the many reasons why like parents need to be involved in their kids' lives and need to know what's going on, because when it comes to situations like that, their parents may be shielded from what's going on, from the reality of the situation, just because they don't confide in their parents, or their parent hasn't put in the time to actually get to know their child and earn their trust.
Yeah, and I think adding on to that point too, Emily, obviously for safety reasons, it's super important. And in general, I'd like to believe parent involvement to some extent, if your parents are supportive of you dating, is extremely crucial, right? Like the two high schoolers I know that are probably like the most committed couple I've seen where they really trust each other. I think they have like they actually really care about it for the long term. Both of them have really good relationships with each other's parents, their own parents, and I think that plays a huge factor, right? I mean, at that point, it's literally like that person is family. And I guess that also gets into another conversation of how do you address even going about a relationship, right? I guess I'd also want to hear this from you and Sumrith for the college and high school level difference. How many people do you guys think take relationships seriously? Like, would you say most people you know is genuinely taking it seriously? Is it mostly just casual?
For me personally, I believe it's definitely like a person per person basis. As for my friends, I feel as though they're very much so relationship people. Like I have some friends who've been in relationships for about the last year or the last couple of months. And then I know also a lot of people who are non-committal. I think it really just varies while you're young, just because people's heads are in different spaces and they have different ideas for what they want their lives to look like. But for me personally, I'd say I know people from definitely like all different types of mindsets or attitudes or sentiments in regards to dating.
I agree with Emily because a lot of my the friend groups, each person really has their own idea of what dating should look like. Like some of my friends think like, oh, let me just get as much experience as possible so I can do better, like when I like give more commitment in my future. But I know a lot of people who are also very like relationship oriented who need another person per se to like well, I feel like it might be a problem to be overly dependent on someone, but I know a lot of people who are have really good relationships with their partner, and it really helps them, and they have extremely committed relationships. But there's also people who will like I don't know how to phrase this nicely, but they're not the most committed to every person, and they'll be doing a lot of things behind their backs, which I don't think they reflects on them as a person. Like I would think they're a perfectly fine person until they started doing some things that are questionable. But honestly, I really just think it depends on person to person, on their views. Another thing I want to say is that in some of my friend groups, a lot of their parents do not support dating at all, and in turn, they've never really dated anyone. But some of my friend groups, they have parents that do support dating, and they've been more active in their dating life at least.
Yeah, so Sumrith, you brought up a good point too about how it like the reflection on the person, right? And that got me thinking, I just want to add on to it. Do you think there's an essence of social status that people think about when they consider dating in the high school level, even at the college level? Because I know for some people it's actually about proving something to other people, right?
Yeah, like there's like saying like, oh, you don't pull or like you don't attract people, which is it's obviously a matter of pride where you want to be in a relationship to show off that oh you can attract someone or like. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but then in that regard, right, the sentiment like gets skewed. Like in that case, would you still consider it dating for experience per se? Like would that relationship still have that purpose anymore?
Well, if it's for the sole purpose of attracting to show off to your friends, I personally am not very fond of the idea. Because think about the other person. The other person is generally interested, unless the other person is also thinking the same. I mean, you could like be mutually using each other. But if the other person like genuinely cares about you, but you just want them to show off to your friends that you can attract someone, then I personally feel like that's a bit wrong, or like morally at least.
Yeah, and that's where it can also definitely have an effect on people, right? If boundaries aren't set up clearly at the start. And I know this is definitely deviating, but it was just a thought that came to my mind when you were talking about that. Do you believe in like the one concept? Because I know that's another very split philosophy, right? Some people think there's millions of people out there that could work for them and they just got to find whatever works. Some people think there has to be that perfect person. What do you guys believe on that?
I mean,
Well,
I'm very oh, sorry,
no,
continue.
no, you can go. You can go.
Oh, I'm very like old school, so I would definitely say that I believe in the one per se, but that's also just because like that's just my like personal belief. I also do think it just varies from person to person. I think a lot of my friends they kind of go into dating with the idea of like, like you figure out what works for you along the way. Me personally, I think like even as like a kid, I've always believed in that. I've always like kind of adhered to that. Um I wouldn't exactly know what to call it, I guess, idea, for lack of better words.
I personally believe that it's there's not going to be like one soulmate for me because finding the perfect person is kind of unrealistic, at least in my opinion. But I do know a lot of people who are like, oh, he is the one, or like she is the one, and they just chase after that person even if they don't feel the same.
Yeah, so but I guess also on that note, right? What defines the perfect person? Everybody has flaws, right? So, of course, if there's truly the one, then you won't know until you find them. But I think for people, it's hard too because I know some people, there's definitely a subset where they get into a relationship and they feel like they regret it. Like somebody out, this just isn't the right person. There's somebody out there that could be better. How would you guys say, even if it's not like the perfect relationship, what do you guys do to figure out your standard for just what is an adequate relationship? Like, do you guys just have a list of red flags and green flags? What would you say is leading into what's a deal breaker versus what can slide, right? Like, what would you say creates that person that's worth going with in the long term?
For me, I tend to go into things intuitively. If something makes me feel uncomfortable, then I think that's definitely something that I should take note of. Even if it's not something that's large scale, it's something that I should at least make a mental note of in case it is a repeat occurrence. Or if something is has made me uncomfortable to a larger scale, I feel like that would definitely be enough or sufficient to terminate the relationship. But it is different for everybody. I just work things by ear, I suppose, or just based off of how I feel, largely intuitively.
I personally, if I am attracted to someone, like by when I see them or when I start talking to them, mostly, that's when I know if I want to like be interested in them at all. If I think that they're not like a good person at all, or if they say comments that like make me think they're homophobic or ableist or and like things that I wouldn't really like vibe with, I guess. I wouldn't try to pursue anything. But if there's someone who's like amazing personality, like talks to me, makes me like if I basically just feel attracted to them, I guess I go for them. But I don't have like a list of like red flags, like, oh, if they do this, it's bad. If I feel, as Emily was saying, if I feel largely uncomfortable, I might talk to them about it, or I might just lose interest right there and then.
So then, what do you think is the most important thing? Like getting away from things that are wrong or would be a deal breaker. What do you guys think is something that is crucial in a relationship? The relationship just can't survive without it.
Well, I think you guys just need to have if you guys can have fun together, I think that's honestly the most important thing. Like you guys both need to enjoy each other's company. Um, But obviously, there's a lot of other factors that also play into it, like social status or like status in general is a big one, such as like in many fantasy novels or like many things I've read, there's always like a teacher student thing, which is because of like positions of power, it just seems wrong. Or like even if two people would enjoy it together, many like there's lots of social aspects to it. Like they might be judged by friends, family, loved ones. But yeah.
For me, I'd say the most important aspect in a relationship is definitely respect. Someone who respects your ideas and opinions and sees you like as an equal, whether that be like socially, intellectually, whatever you may have it. Just somebody who also respects your boundaries as well. I think respect is definitely something that is not overlooked, but something that definitely should be, like, higher on the podium of what people need in relationships. Because I feel like when we hear about, "Oh, what do you want in a relationship?" We hear, like I feel like communication is definitely, like, the largest one, but things of that sort. But I think respect should definitely be, like, higher up or just more commonly spoken about.
And so let me ask you this, when you're looking around at the world at large and you see people like me and your parents, your grandparents, friends, just whatever, and you see how people are doing in relationship, whether it's good or they're screwing it up, how does that affect you? And do you all talk about these things in general? Like, role models or, I mean, how does looking at some of us, how does that offer you hope or a guidance or direction? What do you all think?
So, Marilyn, could you elaborate a little further? Like, are you asking essentially how has do other relationships affect your viewpoint on relationships?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, we can agree you're probably kind of new at having romantic relationships. And so, how do you know how to do it other than what you might read in a book, see in a movie, or see in plain sight based on your parents, your family, friends, somebody tells you? I mean, and some relationships are not so good. I
For
mean,
me, oh,
yeah,
I was gonna say for me, seeing my aunt and my uncle has definitely been like a huge inspiration for me, just because they are very like loving towards each other. And my aunt always like gives me advice and she always like leads me, which I've always been very grateful for. And I think having her like what is it, guidance has definitely like allowed for me to, I guess, have higher standards and definitely like look at things through more of a not skeptical eye, but definitely like watch out for red flags. Just always be cautious with whom I surround myself with and the company that we keep, the company that I keep, just because, it is true the company that you keep does reflect on you largely. And so seeing them and, what she tells me has definitely made me, just want to only really have relationships if I feel that I genuinely have a connection with the person and that they care about me. So
Yeah, that's awesome, Emily. I guess like similarly for me, I'm blessed to have parents that are still in like a long-lasting and loving relationship. So they've definitely been role models for me, and I've heard a lot of things. Like I definitely think there's studies that show that kids generally gain some relationship habits just from observing their parents, and that has had positive and negative effects on people. But I also think that for adolescents who let's say their parents are not good role models for them and they struggle to find that guidance, it's easy for them to lean on how like the media portrays relationships or how relationship is in their society, like, high school, college. And I think that is where negative effects can occur because I don't think the media's portrayal of relationships, if anything, it doesn't even really necessarily teach you how to go about them, right? But beyond that, there's not enough of a way to, show depth in a relationship. And when you look at a lot of celebrity cases or cases, from like famous figures, it's not really giving you the full in-depth show off of what that relationship really means to that person. So I think if you struggle where you don't have those role models in your life, it's very easy to get caught into like a rabbit hole of learning it from just the wrong sources, learning it from media that's showing you your relationship has to be one way, or media that's telling you you don't even have to be in a relationship. And you then need to do the self insight on what do you really want out of your relationship, which you don't know where that came from. Was it your childhood? Was it how your parents' relationship turned out? So I guess to that extent too, I'd like to ask everybody else on the podcast today, how do you think the media can affect people's relationship for the better or the worse, right? I'm not trying to just skew it to one side.
I think that that is definitely kind of a double, like there's two sides to everything. And I guess I'll speak to the negative first. I think with the media, they can definitely edit or make a relationship seem like it should be one way and kind of project or push this image. Because at the end of the day, it's like the media will only show you what they want you to see. You don't really see like the intimate details of relationship. You don't see how the dynamic works on a day per day basis. You only see, I suppose, its peaks. And as for the positive, I think seeing love in the media can definitely kind of like illuminate for people like, hey, maybe I should like wait for somebody who does care about me and who has feelings for me instead of just settling for whatever you may have. So I think it definitely just there's two sides to it, but I think at times the negative can outweigh the positive because I also believe that there are a lot of negative portrayals in media, particularly movies and TV shows, for that drama effect, but because like some young people may not have role models or other relationships to compare what they want for themselves to, they may think, "Oh, that's what a relationship is supposed to look like," when in reality it's like they're doing that for the intrigue. They're doing that for to get their views up. You know what I mean?
yeah, I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. And before Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you, Samantha, but I just want to make a point of inviting our listeners to call in and not be just listeners, but be talkers too. Call us at 919-518-9773. You'll come right into the studio, or you can join us on Skype, and that would be at computers. That's plural, then the new number 2K voice. And you can also comment. I see that there are people in our chat. Love to hear what you have to say. What are your thoughts? What are your suggestions? What experiences have you had in what we're talking about in relationships and how they evolve and how to look at them the same, differently? Who are your role models? What steps do you take? I mean, some of what I'm curious about from listening to you. So I'm like sitting in the audience, right? I'm listening to you and I'm asking you questions like the audience might want to. So how do you ask somebody out? I mean, and how do you do that? Does that happen? Do you purposefully ask somebody out, or it just kind of like happens? Like you're in a group and you are all going out for pizza and it just you kind of pair off. I mean, how does that happen?
I mean, in my experience and like how what I've heard, I'm asking someone out is like a decision that someone would make like prior to asking them out, rather than just like going out with a group of friends to getting pizza and like having two people like pair off. Usually, in my experience at least, asking someone out is like it's not a pre-planned decision that is then like usually people rehearse how they would ask someone out in spite of it. It might be because they're nervous or just like to get like a better grasp of things. But well, you just like ask someone out when you like, think about it and then you talk to them, I guess.
I'm, I'm always so impressed when I hear you all talk because I'm sitting here and I'm like, you do better than we do.
Thank
I
you.
don't think we, I mean, I'm going to speak for myself, but I don't think I ever planned any of that. I was always caught off guard and not always handling situations correctly. So I honor all of you. And so I'd love you to get more into some of the weeds. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I actually think that's like interesting because I almost have like that completely opposite view from
Okay.
Sumrit here, right? So in my opinion, well, it's definitely common, I guess, among my friends where you kind of like actually, say you want to ask that person out. Most of the time, the relationships I've seen happen just come up from if two people share a class together, doing an activity together, you went out with a group of friends, and then I guess maybe you could consider this a form of asking them out. You ask them for like their phone number for whatever reason. Maybe you just want to talk to them, get to know them better, or you just form that friendship in the community which you already know them as a part of. And from there, things grow. I have one set of friends who've been a couple for over a year now, and they met when we were just doing our school musical together. Like they would just see each other sometimes, they talked to each other, they became friends. And then once they established themselves as friends, that's when somebody has to take the next step to say, I want our friendship to be more than just that friendship, right? So I don't think that at an introductory level, asking people out is the way I've seen most relationships happen. But I do think that somebody has to make the move to say, I don't want us to just be friends. I do think that's definitely how things usually go.
I agree with Josh. I feel like definitely when two people like each other, like initially before anything gets very serious, I feel like there's always that probable deniability like aspect where one person may ask the other person for their phone number, but like, oh, like, hey, like just in case you ever want to study together, just always having that probable deniability aspect just in case that person may not receive that gesture well, or in case they might think it's too forward. And then from there, you kind of feel it out and see if you actually like each other. And then one person ends up, being like, oh, hey, I like you. Do you want to be in a relationship? Or hey, would you like to go on a date? I feel like that's generally how it goes. I agree.
I agree with Emily, but in my opinion, I think it's important to make your intentions like clear. If you're approaching someone because you think they're attractive or you want to date them, I don't think you should like tell them you want to be friends. I think you should make it more obvious that you're not approaching them to be friends. Person.
Yeah, and I think that actually that's where you really have to get into like the terminology too, because in my opinion, Summer, right, I would like to think that even if you approach them just because you're attracted to them, you also want to learn other things about them that would like say like, yeah, for sure. Because this is just for me, right? I've always viewed it as the second you ask them out and you've gone like dating once or twice, people are already going to consider you in a relationship. But it's through those one or two dates you begin to see that person's personality and decide. And I wouldn't want to be labeled off as a relationship that got broken up when I don't think I ever wanted to fully commit, right? So for me, it's more of a thing of like, you, even if you are interested in them, you can just start off as friends and then you lay the intention clear once you've decided that's truly what you want. Because you need to take time to get to know the person and learn, hey, this is, learn different things about them that decide if this is a go or not a go. So I guess that's just how I view the situation, right? It's two different opinions, but I would definitely like to hear your thoughts on, whether you agree or disagree and why.
Okay, well, as what you said is true. I've had a lot of friendships broken up just because they would approach me as a friend, but then they'd like gain feelings later on, I guess. But I still think of them as like a complete platonic friend. Like I just think of them as a friend, and then or if they confess to me and I reject them because I don't have feelings from the same way, and our friendship gets awkward, or it's not the same as it was at least. So
So
I
how oh yeah, continue.
no, that was done.
Okay. So how often would you say that like when you're friends with somebody and then they've had to like confess to you or something, it ended it there. You just couldn't really be friends with them anymore without things being weird or anything like that.
Well, it's not like it just like suddenly ended. It's more like they started going a little bit more distant. I still try to give the same amount of I still try to act the exact same way as I did before, but it never really was the same. Like as much as we'd like to pretend it was the same, there was always something off between our dynamic, which is not like necessarily like it's not. I've had friends who have confessed to me, and we're still like good friends. But it's a lot of the time, at least in my experience, it's not the case.
Yeah, so you're also saying, I guess to an extent, right? If that person confessed to you and then you ended up telling them you didn't like them, and then now they start to go distant, even though you're putting the same amount to the friendship, then it does give off that impression, right? That like from day one, that was all they really cared about. And then once that got like didn't need to get met, the whole friendship they never really like cared about beyond that. So then I do think that it does get into the philosophy of why people like how people even think they should approach a person. Do they approach them with that intent right off the bat, or do they approach them wanting to get to know the person? So I think that does circle back to the whole point about honesty and making sure you like set those boundaries at the start.
Can I ask a question? I say that all the time, but of course I can, just like you can, right? Why did you use the word confess?
Because I mean, that's what's usually among my peers. It's known as like confessing feelings. Like you're confessing to someone that you are attracted to them, or you want to be more than just friends.
Okay, it's just and it's interesting, and I'm just like wow, it's like you're confessing a secret. It seems so very powerful when you get to a point where you are confessing your love or appreciation or like for someone. It's a big chunk of something, and confess is a big word for a big action, and that's how you see it, right?
Yes.
Wow, that is impressive. I have to tell you, that's a real impressive. I am glad you see relationships that important. Do you
Yeah, and
s-
I think Marilyn definitely adding on to that, right? I think the reason confess gets used so much at our age level is because whether it's for the better or the worse, for some people, this is how they value their lives. They relationships are the most important thing for them. And so if somebody spends time, I think it does depend how long you're fostering the feelings. Like if you just saw somebody one day and you like just like saw them on the side of the street and you were interested in them, you wouldn't go up to them and then suddenly say like, "Yeah, I'm confessing my love for you," right? I think confess comes in when there's been time taken to build up that relationship or to build up those feelings to the point where now it's almost like by not telling them, you feel like you're lying to them or keeping a secret. And that's kind of where the word originates in a sense.
That was really deep, and I agree.
I agree too. I feel like definitely when it comes to profound emotions, I feel like as though there are things that definitely fester with you for a long time and it's something that you can't exactly take your mind off of. So almost not telling that person does feel like you're almost withholding it from them just because it's almost all consuming in a way.
I never really thought about it like that, but like now that you guys have said it, it like makes a lot of sense. You know?
Yeah, so I guess going from there, right? Like with Marilyn's point about why do we use the word confess? How powerful do you think relationships really do end up becoming for like teenagers? Because it always depends on the philosophy, right? How much are you focused on your work versus the people you know? And what do you think will bring you that overall like fulfillment in life?
Well, for some people, it's like everything. Like I know a lot of people who give everything into the relationship, and they may be overcommitting, in my opinion. Like they're neglecting other people, but for them, their partner is everything to them. But I also know a lot of people who kind of neglect their partner in the same sense. Like they are in a relationship, but they're not as committed as most people would think a relationship would be like.
I think the topic of relationships during adolescence is definitely like a very polarizing topic just because, you have one demographic of people who give their all to it and, who have their first loves during this age group, during this like time in their lives. So, of course, like these emotions and that relationship can be all consuming. And because of that, they have a lot of memories from that time period or from that relationship. Whereas you have that other group of people who they don't necessarily care or it doesn't really interest them to commit to one person or to like invest a lot into the person that they may be dating. So I think it does like largely depend, but I think for those people who have their first loves during this age group, they do definitely like commit a lot and they see it as like I guess emotions that are almost like um insurmountable, I guess, for lack of better words. They see it as just something that like they'll always have for this person. And I think the concept of first loves is definitely something that's very popular. There's also that phrase, it's very like common, like you never get over your first love, which I don't personally believe in, but for that to have been coined, I think it definitely goes to show how like there is definitely that group of people who do put in a lot of effort and time and energy to their relationships during this age.
So yeah,
I
would you? Oh yeah, you go, Summer.
Right, okay. I agree with where you were. Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. You can go, Josh.
Okay, oh good, yeah. So I was just gonna add on to what Emily was saying, because I guess to an extent, when you're trying to have that long-term relationship and build that person into your family, would you guys there would be a point where you would sort of need to overcommit? I don't know if overcommitting is the right word. Like, obviously, balance, in my opinion, is the most important thing for a happy lifestyle. But there is some point where I think you do need to start making some sacrifices for your relationship. And what would you guys think would be a threshold of either what age or like what stage of relationship warrants that making sacrifices for your relationship rather than sacrificing your relationship for other things?
I
Again, you go. Emily.
No, it's okay. I've been talking. You go ahead.
It really depends on person to person because a lot of people have like set goals for the future. Like they know what they want to do, they know where they're gonna end up. But a lot of people also don't. Like they don't know what they want to do. They don't know how they're gonna do whatever they want to do. They just have not everybody, but I know a lot of people who just have expectations set upon them on what they have to be rather. And in that case, if you have a clear goal or you know what you want to do, I feel like sacrificing that for a relationship is not the brightest idea. I mean, it may be fun. If it lasts, I think it could be justified. But personally, at least, I don't have the clearest path of what exactly I want to do in the future. And in that case, I'm more prepared to sacrifice like my time for a relationship, while others might be more busy and they have to sacrifice their relationship for their lives.
For me, I believe that threshold definitely may come more into play within your late 20s or early 30s, just because you're at that point, you're at an age where you're definitely settling down and thinking about having kids or, buying a house or living with said person. Whereas while you're young, you mostly spend time with each other and just get to know with each other. It's more lighthearted per se. Whereas when you're older, things are more serious, which isn't inherently bad, of course. It's important to find a life partner who is dependable and who's responsible and who cares for you and would make a good parent. But I definitely do believe that threshold is within your late 20s to early 30s, just because those bigger responsibilities and those adult responsibilities are a larger factor because you're not only just thinking about making sacrifices for your partner, but also for your child and also for where you want your kids to grow up or where you want the rest of your life to be or where you want to retire.
Yeah, and
So
I mean, it brings up the point that when relationships grow that far, it's like a partnership with the other person, right? And I think that goes into what like paradigms do you want to view your relationship in? Because I think it's important, especially I guess as you're growing up as a teenager and all, for these people at this age level to have a framework for what they want out of their relationship, especially because I think with social media being so prevalent, people posting only the great things about the relationship, like you could go through your friend's page and it's all about their significant other. people have a false sense of what a relationship looks like. And then for people who don't have those experiences, they just assume it's meant to be all happy. If we get into one argument, then it's not the right person, things of that nature. And I think that just completely paints a false picture, because of things like social media, of where do you really want a relationship to be. And I think having that framework is really important. You could view it as this is the person I want to have fun with, or you can view it as this is the person I have to share a bank account with, right? It just depends on how you're viewing that in the long term. So I would definitely say, I think for at our age level, you don't have to worry about like this is the person I'm going to share a bank account with. But I also it addresses that both you and that person have so much growth left to do in life, right? People say around the mid 20s, late 20s, like you brought up, Emily, that's when your brain's fully developed. You might have a clear path of where you want to be. And having that clear path makes it a lot easier. So would it be worth having a relationship when you yourself haven't even figured out the person you're going to be?
I think circling back to what we were saying at the very beginning of the podcast, I think largely for the experience is really important just so you can actually develop that paradigm as you were saying. I think, in order to develop that framework, you need something to reference. You know what I mean? In order to develop standards or certain ideas of what you would like for the future. And I feel as though just because relationships don't last while you're young, they're more fickle. I I don't really think that goes to say that they're exactly failed. I think generally as people, we equate longevity to success when that may not always be accurate. You can have a fruitful relationship while you're young and learn a lot from each other, and that can serve you in the long run because it'll show you what type of qualities, like generally, you want in a partner, or it could show you what you don't want in a partner. You shouldn't exactly write things off as, oh, it failed just because there was no longevity. There was no longevity element to the relationship. And, just because a relationship may be long lasting doesn't exactly mean that it is fruitful or beneficial to the people. Because at the end of the day, like people do have a tendency of sticking to what is convenient for them, and they may stick to individuals who they're comfortable with because they're scared to go out into the unknown. And that's just something that's embedded in human beings, that they're afraid of what they don't know or what they are ignorant to. So, and it even goes to show, like, in big picture ideas in our society, like, people are generally like nervous of things that they don't understand, or they're wary of them. So,
Yeah, Summer, did you have anything you wanted to add on to those points?
Not particularly. I was kind of just thinking about what Emily said, because um, in my experience at least, sometimes what about longevity does not equal success. Sometimes, in my experience at least, a 3 week long situationship could make me happier than like a relationship that went on for like months. But it wasn't that we weren't happy in that longer relationship. It's just that it was less problematic per se. Like it was more convenient, as Emily would say. As Emily
Yeah,
said.
so Summer, could you actually like elaborate on that point about a 3 week, whatever situationship being more like fun or bringing you more happiness than something like that in the long term?
I'm not saying that that's always the case, but I'm saying like if I'm saying that's not completely like out of the realm of possibility. Like a shorter thing could make you a lot happier than a long term thing based off what's going on, like personal circumstances.
Yeah, all right. So would you just say that everybody defines the happiness they got from a relationship differently?
Yeah, actually, because until now I would consider more longer relationships more successful, but I after Emily was talking, I was like, oh, like I had kind of like a light bulb moment. But yeah.
Did you learn anything today, Emily?
yeah.
What'd you learn?
I would say that I definitely learned like how, I mean, like you two are like younger than me. So, like I'm not really in with high school like kids because I am older. So I mean, I definitely learned how like people younger than me think, or, generally what's more like, I wouldn't say that I'm super like not hip to what is going on because I am like only like a couple years older, but it's nice to see that like things are kind of like generally the same, or, that like you guys like still think similar to me, I guess, for lack of better words. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, what's interesting about all of you is that you're all old souls and have so much intelligence and emotional knowledge. You all have so much knowledge, I guess, and we don't have a lot of time left. but I was like, I was just so impressed, and I know other people that are listening feel the same way. I guess, are you the norm, or do you feel, and maybe this is too big a conversation, we have to move it for the next time, but I think, it's really impressive to hear you, and you give me so much hope for my future and the future of my grandchildren. And I thank you for that because you are outstanding.
Thank you.
Yeah, Marilyn, I really appreciate that. And on a closing note here, though, I did also want to elaborate on you asking Emily if she learned something, because I definitely felt like there were two key things here today that I completely didn't think about before, right? The first was that every time we brought up experiences, Emily would kind of talk about people constructing the framework. And once you asked us about where do people find those role models, where do people address it, it occurred to me that for some people, they have nobody where they can actually learn what a relationship should look like from. I never thought about how did those people figure it out, right? I've only really been thinking about how I figured it out. And adding on to that, I always thought of the experiences that like people at my age level refer to for relationships. I always thought of those experiences as just people want to like almost I hate to word it like this, like burn through people until they find the person, right? People just they go through relationships trying to see who they can find. But I never thought about how at the teenage level, people actually learn how to view a relationship. They learn boundaries. They learn those social skills just from being in a relationship. Which I guess in my standpoint, while I do think those can be learned from friendships, I never thought about that some people don't even have the boundary layout set up. If their parents don't have a great relationship, how do they know what the right choices are to make for their relationships to be stronger in the future? So that was the biggest takeaway for me from all of this.
What about you, Smoth? What do you,
Well, this is the deepest conversation I've like ever had, honestly. Like, call me immature for this, but this conversation, this like whole this hour, I'll definitely be thinking about this like a lot going forward. And I
you are
like thank you
welcome
for
to
inviting
come
me.
back
Mhm.
anytime you want.
Thank you. Invite me anytime, I'll be here.
Every time. You are welcome to be here every time. The
Yeah,
fact
and
that
so
this was as deep as you've gone, I is extraordinary. And like I will sleep really good tonight because of what you just said. That's what I just learned. So thank you. Dead
yeah,
chat.
so now in our last 2 minutes, guys, if there was basically one lesson that in your experiences you wanted to share with other teenagers dealing with relationships, what do you guys think that lesson would be?
For me, I would say that comparison is the thief of joy. That's a really common quote, and it's something that I've definitely integrated into, I suppose, what I believe heavily, or just like my general like morals. Like comparison really is the thief of joy because comparing your relationship or just your life in general to what other people may have is not going to serve you in any capacity. And at the end of the day, we are all at a different chapter in our life. So it's really important for us to, just keep looking ahead and do what makes you happy and, you know, just keep going. Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, so go
Yeah, I
ahead.
definitely agree. And then Summer, if you have anything you want to say.
Yeah, that was really nice of Emily. But in my opinion, respect the other person. I don't want any one of my friends like crying to me about how their like how their partner messed up and how like they need to like move on or something. And then they'll get back together with them in the next half an hour. So respect your partner.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I guess my final finishing note on all of this would just be that I do think that when teenagers are handling relationships, it's extremely important what you use in order to figure out your framework for what a relationship should be. With social media, with everything out here today, it's too easy for people to get caught up in these perfect, ideal, like number one relationships existing, which while they definitely could be something close to that in the long term, when you're still young, it's definitely not you're in no rush, right, for that to be found in the short term. And I think people can have a higher standard. There's no need to stoop down so low that you're just not happy in any relationship you're with. And if you have a clear goal in your life, take the time to work on yourself now over your relationship. And you can use relationships as a tool to help prepare you for what you want in the long term. So that's my final word, and that's everything I had to say.
So you're all real impressive. And I have to say that 10 times over again and again. So I want to just let everybody out there know we do this every month. the second Monday in the month at 6 o'clock. If you are someone who's interested in being on our show, you want to be interviewed, you want to work in the back end, you want to help us promote, you want to help us find guests, you want to help us find topics, we'd love to have you. You can use it on your resume. We'll help you with that. If you want to be a host and come in here and talk and be part of our discussion, we'd love you to be in here as well. Just reach out to us, reach out to me at marylandshannon.com, and I will be more than happy to invite you in. We'd love to have you. And with that, we will be here next month. Amnon, who is in the back, thank you very much for all that you do always. And for Emily and Josh and Samarth, here's to you guys. Keep going, keep talking. Come in here and let's really get into some really good conversations because it's really important. You're making a difference. So with that, everyone, thank you so much.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.